The U.S. military is now preparing for the, quote, big one to hit. They are preparing for a megaquake to hit the central United States. We are also seeing a earthquake cluster hit South Carolina right now, and we are seeing fires and flash flooding alerts being issued as well too. So let's get into all the details here. You guys can see this has been posted by the Tennessee National Guard, the Department of Military from Tennessee. This is called Shaken Fury and Ardent Sentry. All right. So the Tennessee National Guard is preparing potentially for a, quote, megaquake to hit the New Madrid seismic zone. They just put this training drill out, and they are preparing for simulations right now. It says here the Tennessee National Guard is preparing an exercise in order to measure response to a devastating earthquake occurring within the New Madrid seismic zone. All right, and just in the past 24 hours as well too, you can see here we've actually had some activity in places like South Carolina. Look at this cluster that hit South Carolina over the past 24 hours. This is a 3.0 that hit. This is a 2.9, 2.4, 1.8, 2.0. All right, so we're getting activity in places where you typically don't think about it. All right, and Oklahoma's getting activity, Texas is, and of course the West Coast is getting a ton of earthquake activity. But this is significant because this means that they're preparing potentially for a big one to hit. Let's get into more details of this, and then we will get into the flash flooding alerts as well that have been issued for Coconino County in Arizona, all right, which is where Flagstaff and Sedona is. We will get into more details of that in just a second, but you can see here the New Madrid seismic zone is a region of poorly understood and deeply seated faults in the Earth's crust that zigzag southwest, northeast through Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, and Kentucky. And it is lying in the central area of the North American plate. The seismic zone is about 45 miles wide and 125 miles long. The fractures are covered in thick layers of rock, which in turn are overlaid by deep, unstable alluvial material relating to the Mississippi, Missouri, and Ohio rivers. And it says here that on December 16th, 1811, and January 23rd and February 7th, 1812, a series of 3 earthquakes, the largest in recorded American history, east of the Rocky Mountains, occurred near the frontier town of New Madrid, Missouri. It says each measuring greater than magnitude 7.0. Thousands of milder aftershocks occurred daily for more than a year. The first shock was felt from Canada to New Orleans and as far away as Boston, Massachusetts, and Washington, D.C. In the end, some 3,000 to 5,000 square miles were visibly scarred with the effects. And it says topographical changes resulting from earthquakes, including fissures, landslides, subsidence, and upheavals, soil liquefaction, the creation and destruction of lakes and swamps, and the wasting of forests. All right, so they're preparing potentially for a big one to hit. And actually, the National Guard in St. Louis, Missouri was preparing for a very similar event along the New Madrid fault line as well too, because St. Louis, Missouri is going to be a major epicenter. All right, but even all the way in Tennessee, they are preparing for this and they're getting ready. You can see here they're warning people to have these things in a disaster preparation kit. This is coming from the Tennessee military. All right, it says here everyone should have disaster prep kits. Keep them where you spend most of your time so they can be reached in an emergency situation. The kits will be useful for many emergencies. Store your kits in accessible locations. At home, at work, in your vehicle. Having emergency supplies readily available can reduce the impact of an earthquake, a attack, or other emergency on you and your family. Disaster preparation kits include food, water, flashlights, radios, batteries, first aid kits, cash, extra medications, a whistle, and fire extinguisher, etc. right? And here are some of the things they are recommending that you have with you, all right? They're saying medications, prescriptions, copies of medical cards, doctors' names, and contact information. They're also saying first aid kits and handbooks, a dust mask, spare eyeglasses or contact lenses, bottled water, a whistle, sturdy shoes, emergency cash, road maps, lots of emergency out-of-area contact phone numbers, or a list of them, sorry, and snack foods high in water and calories, working flashlight with extra batteries and light bulbs or light sticks, personal hygiene supplies, comfort items such as games, crayons, writing materials, teddy bears, toiletries, special provisions you need for your family and others in your family, including elderly, disabled, small children, and animals, and copies of personal ID. All right, so this was just posted recently on their website here, and they are getting prepared. All right, it's called Shaken Fury and Ardent Sentry. It says, "Are you prepared?" So something to think about. And when you look at all of this earthquake activity, you look at what happened in Russia last month. All right, on July 29th, this 8.8 megaquake that hit the Kamchatka Peninsula. We also just had a 7.5 that hit the Drake Passage just yesterday as well too, and a 5.2 over here not too far away. Also a 6.0 just hit El Salvador right off the coast, and a 4.3. All right, so lots of activity going on, and we could potentially see a big one hit the middle of the country. It's kind of a sleeper one that you don't typically think of. You typically think of places like Los Angeles, the San Andreas Fault. You typically think of maybe the Cascadia Subduction Zone outside of Oregon, right? Or maybe you think of Yellowstone, okay? But this is one that's kind of a sleeper, okay? The New Madrid fault line can have devastating consequences, and a lot more people live here. The population density is a lot higher than, let's say, if something happened in Oregon or Alaska, all right? Mount Spur erupts, something along these lines. Big earthquake happens there, like the one in Russia. It was not a densely populated area, the Kamchatka Peninsula. But if one hits here along Memphis, St. Louis, this entire area is going to be devastated. Infrastructure is going to be destroyed. Roadways, highways are going to have to be rebuilt. It's going to take months, maybe years, most likely, for things to fully recover, right? And they're anticipating this preparation zone all the way over in East Tennessee. You can see here they're highlighting the East Tennessee seismic zone, the Wabash Valley seismic zone, and the New Madrid seismic zone, the one they're most worried about. But there's actually a lot of earthquake and geological activity that takes place in these mountains. Anywhere where there's mountainous regions, even if they've been relatively stable for a long time, you can potentially have earthquakes there, right? And I want you to look at the North American craton, because this kind of helps you to visualize exactly where these earthquakes are happening. I'm trying to bring it up here for you guys to see. So check this out. So you can kind of see, so the big brown area, that's the stable plate, North American plate, North American craton. And you can see along the brown area where it's purple, and then blue where it says it's coastal plain area. So all along this purple region, the deformed craton, is where you have the Appalachian Mountains, you have the Ozark Mountains, you have the Rocky Mountains. If you just look, you follow this brown line along where the purple deformed craton is. The Rocky Mountains are on the west and the north. The Ozark Mountains are in the middle, and the Appalachian Mountains are on the east, going all the way up into New York, Maine, and Canada. So this is where we have a lot of this earthquake activity, and they're worried that we could have a big one in the center where this deformed craton meets the North American plate, and we could have a major readjustment here, all right? And it could cause deformations in the Mississippi River. It could cause new lakes to form, like what happened previously, and it could cause even entire new land areas to be inaccessible or now accessible, right? It could change the topography of the land as well too, right? So something to just be aware of. All right, the military is even planning for it. So it's like once they're involved in these things domestically and they're logistically planning for it, it's just something to put a red flag up, right? They're prepared for everything, but running these drills, putting out these warnings, and they're even asking, are you prepared? It seems like they are putting out a alert for people to just be aware of this because the military is tracking it, right? And no one knows exactly when something like this could happen, but when it does happen, most people are not going to be prepared because they're not even thinking about this type of earthquake impact in this part of the country, all right? We also are getting, we'll get into more details of this, but we're also getting flash flooding warnings that are being issued for Coconino County, all right? It says here the National Weather Service has issued a flash flooding warning for Coconino County in Arizona. This is near Sedona, Arizona, outside of it. And it says the warning expires at 4:45 p.m. local time on August 23rd, right? So they're saying the warning was issued for the pipeline fire scar west of US 89. And there's going to be rainfall amounts between half an inch to 0.85 inches that fell within 15 minutes, all right? They're saying additional rainfall amounts of 0.1 to 0.25 inches were possible in the warned areas, and life-threatening flash flooding is ongoing and expected to begin shortly for areas in and around the pipeline fire scar west of US 89. All right, so lots of flash flooding just going on. We're seeing it in South Carolina, seeing it in Georgia, places of Florida. There's flooding in New Jersey even right now from some of these waves from the hurricane that passed through that state out to sea. Lots of flooding and weather events going on across the country right now. And you can see here Arizona as well too. They probably need this rain because it's been so hot. All right, still anticipated to be 112 degrees in Phoenix, which is a little more south of where this flash flooding is happening, but they probably need some of this rain, honestly, to cool things down and prevent the wildfire problem that is happening. All right, you can see here lots of fires are spreading throughout the U.S., and the smoke is making its way through Texas, through Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas. You can see yellow alerts are going out for multiple states here, and this is due to fires that are happening out west in places like New Mexico and western Texas. We're seeing fires pop up as well too. There's also fires in Colorado happening right now, and a lot of fires going on in Idaho and Montana, right, along the border, and Oregon. Lots of fires up here in northern Idaho. This is typical for this time of year. This does happen a lot. But why does this happen so much? You can see purple air quality alerts are being issued for northern Idaho right now, and places in western Oregon are getting these air quality alerts, and that's from these fires like the Island Creek fire. All right, we have the Central Ferry fire, over 6,000 acres. The Knowles fire, over 2,000 acres. The mile marker 91 fires, over 300 acres. They're saying those two fires are human caused. And Lots of fires in Oregon as well too. Lots of purple air alerts going out near Sisters, Oregon. All right. This one is a brown. They're saying hazardous air quality. Stay indoors. It's one of these things though. It's a catch-22. Stay inside, but the air is probably going to be bad inside too if it's that bad. Most likely, if you can, you're probably going to be evacuating in these areas. If the smoke's that bad and that close, you've probably been issued evacuation orders. All right. Let's get into some more details of these earthquakes that hit South Carolina because these are significant. All right. We saw this cluster here hit South Carolina. And this does happen. All right. This is actually a pretty big cluster to hit over and over with these aftershocks. But there has actually been big earthquakes that have hit South Carolina before. All right. In the past, they've had ones that have destroyed buildings. All right. They've reported that thousands of buildings have been destroyed previously. All right. And they're saying from this one here, it says, due to the activity's shallow nature, loud booms were reported, which experts have previously said as a result of quakes vibrating, reaching the surface. And a lot of these earthquakes have been very shallow recently, only a few thousand feet down. Right, that has been the trend for most of these earthquakes. It says here local authorities did not report any damage associated with the shaking, which is common during weaker intensity events on the moment magnitude scale. All right, so no damage from this one, but previously in the past, there were earthquakes that caused lots of damage in South Carolina. We'll get into details in that just a second. It says according to the South Carolina Emergency Management Division, the state typically experiences between 10 to 15 earthquakes each year, with only a handful significant enough to be felt or cause damage. So 10 to 15 per year, and then we already have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that hit just in the past 24 hours. So we almost have a full year's worth of earthquakes happening just in 24 hours. It says here, experts say that the state is home to many fault lines, with the majority of the activity occurring in what is known as the Middleton Place Somerville seismic zone. Experts say that because the faults occur inside the North American plate rather than at a plate boundary, most of the shaking is typically limited, but that's not prevented magnitude shaking in excess of 7.0 from impacting the state. So there is precedent for a 7.3. It says here in 1886, Charleston and the surrounding Low County were rocked by what seismologists estimated to have been a 7.0 to a 7.3 magnitude earthquake. It says a catastrophic event damaged or destroyed more than 2,000 buildings, toppled church steeples, cracked foundations, and claimed dozens of lives. Emergency managers say if another similar earthquake were to strike modern-day South Carolina, the events could have damaging consequences given the state's growing population and aging infrastructure, right? So, I mean, a lot of these, places like California, a lot of the infrastructure is old, but a lot of it as well, too, has been mandated to be earthquake resistant, at least, right? At least have some type of earthquake stability in the buildings, okay, so it can handle it. But a lot of this infrastructure on the East Coast is a lot older. It was built a lot earlier, and there was actually not a lot of requirements, and most of these states have zero requirements for any type of earthquake resistance in their buildings. So if a big earthquake did hit this region, or St. Louis, or Memphis, or Tennessee, South Carolina, places you don't typically think of a big earthquake hitting, the infrastructure is gonna crumble, right? A lot of it is hundreds of years old, some of the old bridges, some of the old roads, and some of the, electrical infrastructure, power lines, things like that are very old, outdated. The railroads very old. A lot of them are already falling apart. And if there's a major realignment, readjustment, then we could see a lot of these critical infrastructures just collapse and take months or even years, depending on how widespread the damage is, to recover. Right. So just in 1886, 2,000 buildings. It's that's a lot. Even if that happened today, there was 2,000 buildings destroyed. That would be major, right? And it would probably be 20,000 buildings or 200,000. Who knows exactly? And where are all these people going to live? Right, this happens in other places like Turkey after this massive earthquake. A lot of people were just homeless after because their apartment building literally just collapsed. They got out the building and they watched it collapse. And or the lucky ones got out at least. Some people didn't get out, but most people were able to get out. And now they're homeless. They lost everything. And it creates a humanitarian crisis as well too. You can see here it says the earthquake magnitudes 8 or greater is a major earthquake catastrophic, 7 or greater is a major damage in populated areas, 6 minor damage to buildings, 3 to 5 often felt minor damage, 2 or less usually not felt. Right, so we just had a 6.0 outside of El Salvador. Okay, so that's pretty significant. And if a big one did hit in this area, who knows? There could be tsunamis. There could be buildings crumbling. All right. I'm most likely these countries do not have any earthquake resistance built into their building codes or anything like that either. All right. Most states and most countries don't, because it's just something that we haven't expected really for the past few hundred years, while a lot of these modern infrastructures have been built. Right, nobody's really been thinking about this, but I think we're moving into a period where we're going to see a lot more activity, and this is going to become critical. All right, this is going to, I think the future is, most places are going to require, just like most places are now starting to require, like flood plans and flood insurance and things like this, because we're seeing these historic floods somehow. These 100-year floods, these 1,000-year floods are happening every single week, every single month. We're getting a new 1,000-year flood, a new 100-year flood hitting a new part of the country. And this is causing insurers to pull out. All right, it's been a disaster in Florida getting flood insurance. They've been changing the flood maps. New areas are now required to have flood insurance that never had it. And some of these rates, these monthly rates that you're paying, are as much as people's mortgages, right? So I think there's going to be major changes in the insurance realm, in the building realm, construction realm, building codes, things like that. I think it's going to be required to have more of these things, and it's just going to increase costs, but it's also happening. So let me know what you guys think down below. All right, the military is prepared for this stuff. They're getting ready, and they know they want to be ready so they can save people's lives. They can get in there, they can have a plan. And I've read similar documents on this. They were doing this in St. Louis last year, and now they're doing it in Tennessee. But they deployed hazmat crews, CBRN crews, are the chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear crews were all out there for the military. They had their hazmat gear on, they had their respirators on, they had full PPP on, and they were treating this as a, biological event, as something terrible is going to go wrong when these earthquakes hit. There's going to be potentially nuclear reactor meltdowns. There's going to potentially be releases, biological releases from labs. There's going to be releases of chemicals from factories, from manufacturing. There's going to be explosions. There's going to be toxic releases. There's going to be fires. There's going to be a lot of stuff. It's going to be just more than the earthquake. They're worried that when it hits a big city, there's going to be a lot of other things that go along with it. So they're prepared. They have hazmat crews, seaburn crews, everything. All right. So you don't need to go that far, but just think about it. Think about what preps you would need, what preps you would want, and be able to bug in, right? It's a situation where you're most likely not going to be able to bug out because roads will be destroyed, things like that. The military will be there. Things are going to be locked down. But if you can bug in, stay in your home for a couple weeks, most likely you can get through the worst parts of it, all right? So thank you guys. Hope you guys are staying safe, staying prepared out there, staying stocked up. I hope you have big blessings for your wife and your family, and I hope you have a big old blessed day.